Well, good morning, everybody, and I apologize for having yesterday off. I wasn't feeling that great. I want to first say hello to Haley May 23. She said, "This Brooks chick again, bye." As if I'm Regis and Kathy Lee. Then at 9:01, she reminded everybody, she says, "Why am I here? Bye." I tell you what, without a little bit of spice in our coffee, what would we do? My goodness. Well, I'll tell you what, we have a lot going on. For one, it's hump day. You know what that means. Today, we start jury selection for little Quentin Simon. Yes, I definitely will be talking about that tomorrow. The hurricane is coming through Florida, and it doesn't look pretty to me at all. I understand several airports are closed down, and I just don't think I'd want to be there. Our girl Rexy, I think we're going to do Rexy on the scene, kind of like JLR. At first, we heard it was going to hit at 2 a.m. Wednesday morning. Now it's going to be Thursday. It's moving really slow, but once it gets there, not going to be good. And I feel horrible for all of the people in Florida. Talked to Rexy this morning, talked to True Crime Beat, and they both said that they have each been through hurricanes before. Connie said it is scary here. Now, we have been through several tornadoes in Oklahoma. Several. We don't name them. What we say is, look at that bitch. And then we crack a beer, flip the steak, and once we can't breathe, we run inside. And once we don't hear what sounds like a train whistle, we jump up. Okay, Rexy just said Court TV will be following Quentin's case. We will definitely be talking about Quentin tomorrow morning. Because the last I heard, is that's when I called the courthouse in Savannah, is that it will not be televised. But woo, I am on pins and needles for that. Let's go ahead and start our Wednesday. We know what happens on Wednesday. We know what happens. We got to say hi to Mike.
Oh, guess what day it is? Guess what day it is? Huh? Anybody? Julie, hey, guess what day it is? Oh, come on, I know you can hear me. Mike. What day is it, Mike? Leslie, guess what today is?
It's hump day.
Woohoo! And even OJ has his pink on.
On Wednesdays, we wear pink.
No. Not really my sort of thing.
Not really my sort of thing. Cicada, she says they will be released and become famous like Gypsy Rose. How fair is that to regular people? Yeah, look at the people that are serving sentences for a little bit of weed. I don't know what's going to happen here. Everything I'm reading is they're going to get out. Eyeball says, Brooks, you didn't call anybody. Stop your misinformation, you skunk. What sad behavior. I don't quite understand. Are you in the way of the hurricane, or do you just not have a life? I don't understand that. Very sad. Very sad. Two Boston moms brought it up. She said, I need to watch the Netflix Monsters. Have you watched it? Yes. Javier Bardem did amazing. Amazing. So did Chloe Sevigny. Amazing. Great series. So many things came out in it. I think my favorite character besides Javier Bardem was definitely Nathan Lane that played Dominic Dunn. Dominic Dunn is his own story. For all the years he covered crime, we saw him on the front row when O.J. Simpson was found not guilty, and like his mouth just fell open. Fun fact, well, not fun for him or his family, his daughter, Dominique Dunn, played Dana Fleming in the movie Poltergeist. Well, she was, in my opinion, murdered by her boyfriend. She was in the hospital for several days and lost her life. The guy got 3.5 years. Poltergeist, I believe it came out in 1980, 1981. That's his daughter. So I loved Nathan Lane's acting in it. But so much is being revisited, rediscovered. So much about the Menendez brothers. The wig that was purchased when Lyle was in jail, because he had the balding pattern. $2,500. People sending him money left and right. This is not a new problem. Crime Story Diva said, I don't think they should get out, in my opinion. That's what a lot of people say. A lot of people say they don't think any of this happened. There's a new R allegation from one of the many members of Menudo's saying that Jose Menendez R'd him. Why was this not brought up in the 3 trials they had? One of the biggest arguments is Gypsy Rose got out, but hey, that was her plea agreement. That was her plea agreement. After she partaked in what she did against her mother. But that was her plea agreement. They didn't take one. Have they served enough time? What do you think? Diva already said no. They shouldn't. They shouldn't. So the parents are sitting on the couch. Mom is eating ice cream, filling out college applications. We know Kim Kardashian is hot to trot to get them out. She can't wait. Do you think this abuse happened? Because it seems like 2 juries were not convinced and 1 jury believed that it didn't happen. Let's start with this.
This week was the case of Lyle and Eric Menendez, the brothers. The 2 were convicted for the 1989 murder of their parents in Beverly Hills. But now the LA District Attorney is reviewing new evidence in the case.
The Menendez brothers captured the world's attention for decades, and the fascination with this case started back in the 80s.
On August 20th, 1989, Jose and Kitty Menendez were found shot and killed in their Beverly Hills mansion. Less than a year later, Lyle Menendez was arrested and Eric surrendered to Los Angeles police. It was believed that the boys killed their parents for their inheritance.
When the trial began for 4 years later
To be quite honest, that is what I believe. I believe after they got in trouble for burglaries and Jose Menendez said, y'all are screwed, and not in that way. I'm cutting you out of my will. Forget it. Forget it. And he went around himself to pay people back for what they burgled. And remember, after the murder, they went on a horrific, a hellacious spending spree. Rolexes, custom tennis rackets, skiing vacations. Boy mama said, I also think the abuse caused severe mental illnesses in the two. Well, that's what a lot of people argue.
1993, it was a media field day. The Menendez brothers emotionally described years of sexual abuse by their parents. They argued that they killed their parents in self-defense.
But the jury...
Okay, before I get back to this, it has come out recently that Dominic Dunn uncovered when the trial was going on that the actual relationship that was going on in the house was between the brothers, not from the dad. There was an entire op-ed in the Los Angeles Times about it, that it was known by many friends that the brothers had an incestuous relationship.
Was deadlocked and it ended in a mistrial. In 1995, the second trial began.
And a year later, Lyle and Eric are convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison.
Now, fast forward to last year when the brothers filed a motion seeking a new hearing based on new evidence. And that brings us to today.
Joining us live is criminal defense attorney Mark Garagos, who's representing the brothers. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Let's get straight into it, Mark. Take us back to when you first got involved in the case. What gave you confidence that this could all be turned around?
Well, about 2 years ago, I was talking with Cliff Gardner. Cliff is the appellate lawyer who was representing them back in 2005. And he had pointed out to me not only the letter that was found, there was a letter that Eric had written to his cousin Andy, and Andy tragically passed away about 20 years ago. The letter is dated about 8 months prior to the killings. So it shows, and he goes into horrible detail about the abuse that he's suffering at the hands of his father. So you combine that along with, there was a documentary that came out that also there was another victim, now one of the members of the boy band Menudo. And I thought, and as Cliff thought, boy, those, if anything ever called for a reexamination of this conviction, that would be it.
There is a lot of curiosity when it comes to this new evidence coming to light, and obviously the DA playing a major role in all of this. Can you talk about the evidence and also what the DA's team is doing at this point in time?
Well, you know, there's the DA, I thought, made a very brave move by coming out so close, if you will, to the election and saying he is re-examining it.
I'd have to admit that. Because it goes one way or another when it's close to election time, whether it's for president or the state governor. When a DA, they either have on their hands what you call a slam dunk, and so they're going to trial because it looks better on the record, or they do this. And it's very surprising with election time just right around the corner that the DA would even say anything about this case. Because, I mean, look at all the trials we have going on before the election.
Tell you that for the last year and a half, we filed what's called a habeas corpus, which is a challenge to the conviction. About 3 months ago, because of a change in the law here in California, we also sent them over what's called a petition for resentencing. So we've got basically two tracks that we're going down. We're challenging the conviction. We're also saying, hey, Mr. DA, these two gentlemen, the brothers, are perfect candidates for resentencing. They've been in custody now for over 35 years. They've done tremendous work both on themselves and in the prison community. And if there was ever anybody who, under the current state of California law, should be released, these are the two who should be released.
So what are the possible outcomes then if there's these two tracks? I mean, does this go back to court for resentencing, or can the DA just decide, hey, let's just release them?
Everything has to be ultimately blessed by the judge, and it depends on which track we go down. But the DA could decide, and I think what the DA should decide is, look, they've been in custody 35 years. I've often said, if Eric's name was Erica, Lyle would have been a hero, and if they were the Menendez sisters, they would not be in custody. Society has evolved over the last 35 years.
Okay. Ugh. I'm going to agree with that. If they were two girls that said, we killed Big Papa because he was doing horrible things to us, I don't think it would have ever gone to trial. So the only corroboration we have is the letter from Cousin Andy and a member of Menudo saying the same thing happened to him. Okay. My opinion is that's enough. But is 35 years enough for red rum when you were not protecting yourself? And then went on a horrific spending spree. I still want to know how they got access to all that money, considering Jose had told them months prior, you're getting nothing. Nothing. Considering what you've done. Now, their conversation about their mother was, she's always home. No way can we kill him and not her. Because no way is she going to act like someone just robbed us. And in some ways, she's worse than him. Because the enabling pissed them off so bad because she didn't protect them.
We now recognize what we could not accept back then. And if there is any justice, what I would argue that the DA should do is ask the judge to recall the sentence, basically say, I'm going to recall the murder sentence. I'm going to recall the life without parole. I'm going to sentence you now to a manslaughter. And they've done the maximum amount of time on manslaughter.
Let's also talk about the reaction here. What are the brothers saying about this new hearing? How are they reacting? And how are family members taking all of this?
You know, it's interesting you mentioned that, because one of the reasons that we filed or gave them the draft petition for resentencing is 24 of the family members, both sides, Kitty's, Jose's, the siblings, nephews, nieces, cousins, all of them, save maybe one or two, 24, all signed a letter saying, hey, we want them out as well. That is basically unheard of. In my 40 years of practice, I've never had kind of a phalanx of victims who have all signed on to say, enough is enough, we want them out.
Wow. Well, a couple of days ago, you said there's a chance that they could be free before Thanksgiving. I mean, is that really possible?
It is, actually. The DA said that he planned on, I saw in one of the interviews he did, said that Mr. Gascon said that he was, the buck would stop with him. He will make the decision. There is dissent in that office. There's still a couple of people around in that office who, want to try to uphold the conviction for reasons of their own. But I think that the right thing to do, that the fair thing and the just thing to do is get them home, and I'll have them over for Thanksgiving dinner.
Yeah, I guess only time will tell how this all plays out. Very fascinating to see all of this. There's obviously a lot of buzz about the Netflix series going on. There is also a new documentary coming out this week. Do these projects help your case, or do they hurt it?
Well, I will tell you, I'm glad you asked that. There is.
He's more of a politician than an attorney. Oh, I'm glad you asked that. Because the Hollywood propaganda puts things in people's minds to where the reality of what happened almost 40 years ago doesn't really matter. Purple Drank said 35 years is enough. 35 years is enough. And a lot of people say that. They say, yeah, enough's enough. They have served their time. They weren't exactly sentenced to the chair. So 35 years is enough. I mean, they're both married in prison. Do you think, your opinion only, because we don't exactly work in this department, do you think they would be safe in society?
Is almost a boomerang effect with the Monsters Ryan Murphy series that came out, and Eric was very vocal specifically about the characterization or caricature of Lyle. And there has been a sea change in the the age group, if you will, that is driving a reexamination of this. I can't tell you the number of kids or grandkids of people that I know that have been texting me saying free the Menendezes. And what happened was the backlash against that Monster series, I think, inundated the DA's office and others. And I don't think anybody truly understood just how evolved we have become as a culture to understand now that male-on-male abuse can happen, that a father can abuse his sons. I mean, it was ridiculed back in the 90s. And the judge specifically, 8 days after OJ was acquitted and evidence started in this case, all of a sudden started changing the rulings, and actually ruled, and not wrong necessarily back then in the 90s, that the idea of a battered woman syndrome or intimate partner violence did not apply to children. I mean, isn't that amazing now as you sit here in 2024 that a spouse had more protection back then than children did?
Oh, Mark, we have so much to get into. We could go all day long about this. It's so complex. But one last thing, you mentioned, the efforts, of people that are just like saying, hey, times have changed. Kim Kardashian is actually a huge name when it comes to that effort. I mean, what do you have to say about her and her words to the public?
Look, for whatever anybody ever says about Kim Kardashian, and we share an Armenian heritage, so she's an icon, not just in the community writ large, but in the Armenian community. She has taken this up, these kinds of convictions and injustices and excessive sentences as a cause, and she's been, I just think, tremendously effective and articulate on it. She has not, up until this case, waded into.
Is it just me? But who the hell cares what she has to say? Her mom pimped her out for a sex tape with Ray J, sold it, and capitalized. Why does she get to weigh in? If their own family can't weigh in, then why does she get to weigh in? I don't get that at all.
A situation where there was something that others have said a cause celeb, and I thought that was very brave. But she was taken down. She went to the Donovan State Prison. She saw the wonderful work that the brothers are doing with the Green Space Project down there, and she's been very vocal. And boy, it's hard to read her personal essay that she posted and not be moved incredibly by it. And I'm rooting for her taking the bar next year, and hopefully we'll try a case together at some point.
Yeah.
Wow.
Okay. Attorney for the Menendez brothers, Mark Garagos, thank you so much for talking with us this morning. We appreciate you shedding some.
Yes, thank you, Mark Garagos. Sweetie Pie, I'm so glad you're here. Said they may need therapy as they may do to others what their father did to them. Just a thought. That is actually a really good thought. Because I would be scared that they could repeat the pattern. Laura, Daddy G, Eric and Lyle are sociopaths. According to their mother, they are. Incurable demons born without a conscience. They cannot live, they lust. No loyalty, no shame, no guilt. Cheaters, promiscuous, no remorse, crocodile tears. They're dangerous. Wow. How much therapy could get somebody ready for the real world? We have things now that weren't available when they got locked up. I'm sure they've been introduced to some things, but everything's going to look different when they get out. We have technology that may or may not have been introduced to them. One thing that got me, and it's not just from the Netflix, it was actually reported in several books from people that were at the funeral. This is the song they played for their parents, and they sat there emotionless, knowing that Beverly Hills Police and other agencies were trying to find the real killer. Sound familiar? This is the song they played. Sorry to do a music break so fast, but it really got me going.
From the start, you would break my heart, but still I had to play this painful part. You wrap me around your little bitty finger.
Anyone feel bad for Milli Vanilli? You know, they were crucified for lip syncing, and that's all we see now. I mean, hell, we have an entire platform of people that lip sync. It's called TikTok, and become famous.
With your magic smile, you kept me hanging on a lover's cross a while. You put your spell on me, took my breath away, but there was nothing I could do to make you stay. I'm gonna miss you, all the love I feel for you. Nothing could make me change my point of view. Oh girl, I'm gonna miss you, baby.
Given all the love I feel for you, couldn't make you change your point of view. You're leaving. Now I'm sitting here, wasting my time. I just don't know what I should do.
Sorry, but I laughed my ass off when I saw that. I'm like, you have got to be kidding me. But I want to know why this was not presented in trial, because we don't know what the judge does and doesn't allow. So for this member of Menudo to say he was AR'd by Jose, you would think things would have been a little different.
With Judge Ashley Wilcott, it has been 30 years since Eric and Lyle Menendez faced their first trial for the murders of their parents. And our Court TV cameras brought you every moment of that trial. And now the case is back in the news.
Attorneys for the Menendez brothers say new evidence shows that their convictions and life sentences should be overturned.
Now, during their trial, the brothers never denied killing Kitty and Jose Menendez. Instead, their attorneys argued they acted in self-defense.
Wow, they got some scary eyes. I'm sorry, y'all. I know there's some people that are real adamant that they should have never been put in jail. They should have been let out a long time ago. I don't know, just something about Lyle myself kind of freaks me out.
Defense after a lifetime of abuse at the hands of their father.
What is the new evidence? It is a letter sent by Eric Menendez to his cousin, Andy Cano, 8 months before the murder. So that would have been back in December of 1988. In that letter, it detailed his father's abuse. The letter was discovered allegedly or apparently several years ago by a family member and was never presented in court.
Now, in it, Eric says in part, "It's still happening, Andy, but it's worse for me now. I never know when it's going to happen, and it's driving me crazy. Every night, I stay up thinking he might come in. I need to put it out of my mind."
Also included in the petition, a signed affidavit by Roy Rosello, a former member of the boy band Menudo. He claims that he too was raped by Jose Menendez, who at the time was an executive with RCA Records.
Okay, this is what makes me damn furious. He knew they were on trial for their lives. I don't mean the needle. I don't mean the gas chamber. Excuse me. I don't mean anything like that. But life in prison with 3 friggin' trials, 2 hung juries and 1 where they were convicted. Why did this person not stand up? Or was it not allowed? I have a very hard time believing that in 3 trials, this was not allowed. We know that Lyle tried to get many people to say his father did the same thing to him. Purple Drink said there was a female cousin that said they told her about the abuse. That should have all been allowed.
Joining us now, criminal defense attorney representing the Menendez brothers, Mark Garagos. Mark, great to always have you on our show, but in particular to talk about this case, because I have to tell you, I've told Michael, I was captivated by this case, by this trial, by these boys, by their allegations, all of it. And I remember watching it at the time and thinking, I just don't know that I believe what happened to them or what they say happened to them. But yet now you have this letter, pretty great evidence, I would say.
Well, it's and thank you. Always enjoy seeing you as well. The evidence, I think, is not only compelling, it's horrifying. And when you combine it with the declaration by the young man who was then a young man at Menudo, anybody who had any doubts, I think has been disabused. Then combine this, because I don't think people quite understand this, and maybe until I dug into it, I admit to being in the same position. You know, but what happened between the first trial and the second trial is the first trial, all of this evidence was allowed in, not the letter, obviously, that came after the fact a couple of years ago, as you mentioned, but there was a hung jury. Half of the jury found that they would have been not guilty of the murder. That wasn't going to, they weren't going to get acquitted. It was just that they would have had something that eliminated malice and imperfect self-defense, which would have given you a manslaughter. Before the second trial, and what happened in the interim was the acquittal of O.J. Simpson, the judge in this case, same trial judge, reversed himself, and he actually invited the prosecution to reverse themselves, got into the second trial, did not give the imperfect self-defense, excluded much of the evidence of the abuse, and then probably most, the coup de grace really for them, engineering the guilty, was allowing the prosecutor to get up in closing and argue that it was an abuse excuse, that they had just made it up and that it wasn't true.
Okay, I can't speak on the script, in quotes, But the night of the red rum was definitely scripted. The way they purchased the weapons, the way they bought movie tickets, the way they rehearsed calling 911, the way they were living their best life for month after month after month after month after month after month, until Eric couldn't take it anymore and he unloaded on the therapist. He knew he couldn't turn it over because it's privileged information. But he had his secretary listen in and she reported it. Now, this therapist, psychiatrist, psychologist, whatever you want to call him, he had his own issues with the way he was inappropriate with his patients. So, I mean, again, 35 years, is that enough or not? I know a lot of people were up in arms when they went to jail. They're like, how could you do that to them? Just because they lied? Just because they spent a bunch of money? Just because they pulled the big M?
And that's, fast forward 33 years later from when this event took place and almost 30 years since the trial, society's in a wholly different place. Jose Menendez, by all accounts, was a monster now. I mean, there's no other way to look at it.
One of the obstacles facing, I believe, this case is, I was working at Court TV back then, Mark. I don't know if you remember, me and my colleague, Beth Karras, covered some of that case. And this was the case, really. It wasn't OJ. People think OJ put Court TV on the map. It was this case. Everyone knew about the Menendez case. So my question to you is it going to be an obstacle for you, the fact that oftentimes to get this type of case open, to bring in this new evidence, it has to have not been discovered back then and should not have been discovered? Is that going to be an obstacle for you, for a court to say, you know what, okay, we see the evidence, but this is something that should have or could have been discovered back then?
Well, remember, this letter went to Andy. Andy has passed away. It was in his effects. Nobody had discovered it until just a couple of years ago, number one. Number two.
How did you just discover this a couple of years ago? Now, listen, I'm playing devil's advocate. How do we know that this wasn't written and mailed from the jail to the aunt, who's a big advocate of her nephews, that said, oh, look, I was cleaning Andy's old bedroom and just came across this letter. Listen, in 3 decades, I guarantee she has cleaned. How do we know? Where's the envelope? If you were trying to get your nephews out of hot water, wouldn't everybody in the family have been spoken to?
If you listen to you guys did an excellent setup package. The only thing, if I were producing this, one of the things I would have suggested is to have listened to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals argument, because I've listened to the audio and at least one of the judges in the Ninth Circuit understood what happened. Basically, to quote the judge from the Ninth Circuit, they ginned up rules and changed the rules so they could engineer a conviction the second time around. I mean, in fundamental fairness, this case should be looked at again from an equitable standpoint. And now, with this kind of devastating evidence, again, that shows clearly that there was this horrific abuse going on, I think cooler heads after 3 decades will prevail.
And, one of the other things is, and as a former judge, I always hate when there's any issue with the integrity of a judge on the bench, and to hear that basically they said, okay, we're not going to let you consider that. We're going to take that off the table, and really gerrymandering is what I would call it from the bench. But when you hear those kinds of things happening, it affects not just obviously your clients, but really our whole judicial system, because that's not the way it's supposed to work. So what do you envision? What do you hope for as an outcome? Because the reality is these two have been in jail for a very long time.
Well, remember, if they had been convicted of a manslaughter, they still would have done a substantial amount of time. I haven't taken a look at what a voluntary was with use back then, but I would imagine it would have long since been served. What I would hope is that, as I said, cooler heads prevail, and that we realize that these two men, because they're now have been in custody all of this time, would be given the chance to get out and to lead a whatever semblance of a life they can lead at this point. Because 33 actual years for what I would submit if had been tried today. I've had cases in the last 5 years, actually last 8 years, in which the abuse, where the abuse paled in comparison to this, where jurors actually wanted to acquit. And so you have to wonder, has society come
I don't think it's society. I think it's evidence, and the fact that what they're talking about now wasn't presented to the three juries. And I get the social argument. I do. I totally understand the social argument where people say, well, I mean, what about Gypsy Rose? What about Gypsy Rose? She took a plea deal. They didn't. They got their lickings from a jury of their peers. I honestly don't know if they were offered a plea deal, but it's apples and oranges. They are totally different.
An incredible distance in 3 decades, almost 3.5 decades, to understand that these kinds of horrific things really do happen and take place.
And I do agree with you. In the last 30 plus years, there's a huge difference of the awareness and treatment of sexual abuse.
Yeah. You know what's interesting, Mark? When you talk about trying this case in 1998 and you talk about trying it now, one of the things that I think is a big difference is that a lot of people I talk to about this evidence say, well, it wouldn't help the self-defense claim because the abuse wasn't imminent. It wasn't happening. But what we know about this type of thing is the air of fear that this type of situation creates for young people. And I think that would be an area that maybe the prosecution would have to consider. Do you expect, if this is successful, that they might try this case again, or look at it and say things have changed and maybe justice has been served?
Well, I would hope the latter, obviously. I remember trying cases in the 90s where domestic violence cases, murder cases, where it was females who were shooting. I remember one specifically I tried in the LA Superior Court where it was a hung jury between manslaughter and murder. And people were still trying to get their arms around this idea of domestic abuse back in the 90s, in the mid 90s. And so it's hard to kind of transport yourself, if you will, back to the 90s, but we've made incredible strides since then, understanding the damage that this kind of abuse does, is what this rape does to people, and the threat. And by the way, I'm not arguing, and people have to understand this, when this was presented, when this evidence was actually presented to a jury, very ably by Leslie Abramson, in the first trial, half the jurors voted to acquit on the murder charge. So that was back then. Can you imagine if this case was tried now?
Yeah.
And that's a good point, because as we get older as a society, things are presented to us in 1982 and people are like, no, lock them up. 1992, a little more lax. 2012, a little more lax. 2022, they're calling pedophilia a mental illness. The question is, and it's a common sense question, at what point do you believe a liar? What point do you believe a liar? Nothing about the essay was discussed with the therapist. And look, I'm not in Eric's head. We've all told lies. Our weight, our age, our natural hair color. Hell, we've all lied for our kids. Don't tell me you haven't. My child will never do that. My child will never do that. Oh, don't pay attention to my husband. He's just tired. But at what point, legally, do you believe a liar?
Yeah, no, you're right. I absolutely, yeah, it's an excellent point, and I absolutely agree with you. Let's talk about how they are, because the reality is, you see pictures. I've seen some interviews with them, and they look happy as they're incarcerated. I'm not suggesting that's where they're going to be happy, but they look like they are. They're smiling. How in the world are they doing handling their truth and still sitting in jails 30 plus years later?
Well, I look, the reality is they both lived basically their entire adult lives incarcerated. And so you either come to grips with that and deal with it, or you don't. And they decided they're going to deal with it. I think that that also speaks volumes as to whether or not taxpayers need to have warehoused these young men for the rest of their life. I don't think that anybody would say that that's the case, and certainly not the victims. I mean, if you talk to, one of the interesting things here is that, at least in the first trial, relatives of the victims, Jose and Kitty, got up there and testified about some of these horrific things were going on. I mean, remember, one of the things they testified to is that there was a rule in the house that if Jose was in the room with Eric, that you could not go down the hallway. Can you imagine what that, if you presented that today in 2023? Mm-hmm. And if you've got all of we now have Victims' Bill of Rights in California. If all anybody who, by the definition, the constitutional definition of a victim, says these boys were victims as well and deserve.
Okay, hold on. Baby Kisses, I got to answer some comments. Baby Kisses has a question. Who's lying? I'm not saying they're lying now. I'm saying when their parents were murdered, everything was orchestrated by them. The movie tickets, we just got home and found our parents murdered, the fact that they had to keep rehearsing, calling 911. It was almost like they took bad acting classes. Essay was allowed as evidence. In my opinion, be kind. In my opinion, I believe that Eric was a victim of Lyle's. And I believe he was controlled by Lyle. You see, Lyle was the one, they even had Eric take the fall for the burglaries. And then suddenly this story comes through, which could be 100% X. Could be 100% that's what they suffered through. It's just kind of hard to buy when you didn't tell anybody until you studied some books about it. Now, the guy from Menudo, I cannot believe Leslie here didn't track down every family member, cousin once removed, people that work for RCA. I can't believe she didn't track them all down. I want to talk to everybody that knew him. They took the stand and it was their word, theirs only. Now think about the coaching, and I call it coaching, that was paid for, which by the way is not uncommon when someone's going to take the stand. Because we don't speak to each other in a day-to-day the way we do saying if you're on the stand and you've got news cameras all over you and there's a juror and a juror and a juror. So of course you would need a little bit of I'm going to say some theatrics. And don't forget, RCA has a brand to control too. They do not want to hear that one of their top executives was an SAer. It's already embarrassing enough for them that his children are on trial for killing him. It's a lot to get through.
To be out, why wouldn't you give that some credit and some cachet, so to speak?
And the trauma that's caused, that we now know and talk about trauma-informed work and the trauma caused to people who undergo sexual abuse and physical abuse. But really, when you say some of these details, I think it reminds us all who are familiar with the first trial that you can understand in today's world the anger that these two boys would have as a result of the abuse they've suffered.
Yeah, and let me ask you about the abuse suffered by Roy Rossello. I'm sorry, Mark, to cut you off. That abuse, how does that line up with the stories being told by Eric and Lyle? Does it seem to be a pattern? Because I think that would certainly be helpful to your case if that is the case.
I think that's exactly why, because you can almost hear what a naysayer would say. A naysayer would say, well, they wrote that as part of the letter was written. Why didn't they produce it? Blah, blah, blah. Well, my retort would be, it was 8 months before, and the person who it was addressed to ended up dying. Then the retort is, well, maybe they planned to concoct this. That was basically the argument that the prosecutor made at the second trial, after having the chutzpah to get all of this evidence excluded at the behest of the judge. So then the question becomes, well, how do you corroborate it? That's where the declaration comes in. The declaration comes in. To me, that to quote an old LAPD detective who had exculpated a client of mine in a different case, he used the expression that puts a hat on it. So that to my mind, you don't get any more convincing evidence 33 years after the fact than somebody who in real time was suffering the same kind of abuse. And mind you, I think part of what the trouble we have, or the struggle we have, people can't imagine a father doing this with his son. I mean, that crosses virtually every taboo that we grow up with.
And I agree with Garagos on that. Because when this all hit, okay, I don't know how many people back when this was going on had a subscription to People magazine. It was in there all the time. And if you were a 70s, 80s kid, our parents didn't really think too much about what we read or watched. So as you're sitting there reading the magazine, you're like, how can that happen to a boy? Couldn't wrap your mind around it. And as it became more graphic and more graphic and more graphic, it was like, whoa. I think what got a lot of people at the funeral was the song.
It's a tragedy for me to see the dream is over, and I never will forget the day we met. Girl, I'm gonna miss you. erase those memories like a fairy tale. You were so unreal. You left a scar that's so hard to heal. When you had a taste of paradise, back on earth can feel as cold as ice. I'm gonna miss you. I'm gonna miss you. I miss you.
Given all the love I feel for you, could make you change your point of view. You're leaving. Now I'm sitting here, wasting my time. I just don't know what I should do.
It's a tragedy for me to see the dream is over. And I'll never will forget the day we met. Girl, I'm gonna miss you.
It's a tragedy for me to see the dream is over.
And I never will forget the day we met. Girl, I'm gonna miss you.
In my opinion, this was like an homage to their mom by saying, "Girl, I'm gonna miss you." Don't get me wrong. I had the Milli Vanilli CD as well. Played the shit out of it. Remember back in the day when we had the CDs and we had to clean them and all that stuff? We got them from Columbia Records. I probably owe them a good $5,000 because every time something showed up in the mail, I'd fill that out, I'd take my penny to it and get 10 CDs. That's my whole collection. But I didn't dress up for them. I didn't dress up as them at Halloween time like the brothers did. They were huge, huge fans. All right, this is what the DA said yesterday. Baby kisses. I have lots of cassettes. I know it changed the whole game when Columbia House and BMG went from cassettes to CDs. I had to beg for a CD player, and it looked like a ghetto blaster. Big old entertainment center. It sat on top, and it like what's the word? It kind of it was saggy in the middle, plywood. Took my dad a good weekend to put together, yeah. Then they would send collection letters. And I'm like, I don't know, I just taped a penny to it, but they're here.
But we're here to tell you that we have a moral and an ethical obligation to review what is being presented to us and make a determination based on a resentencing side, whether they deserve to be resentenced.
A stunning announcement in a shocking case that continues to make headlines across the globe even decades later.
We have not conceded one way or the other. We're not saying that there was anything wrong with the original trial. We have been given evidence. We have been given a photocopy of a letter that allegedly was sent by one of the brothers to another family member talking about him being the victim of molestation.
So let's turn the clock back just a bit and go back to 1989. On the night of August 20th, 1989, businessman Jose Menendez and his wife Kitty were watching TV together in their den at their Beverly Hills mansion. Unknown to them, two men would enter their home firing off several shots with a 12-gauge shotgun. Jose was shot 6 times, including a shot to the back of his head, and his wife Kitty was shot 10 times by the gunman. Right before the fatal shot to her cheek, she was reportedly on the ground, crawling away when one of the gunmen ran to the car to reload on ammunition before returning to the house and firing off the fatal blow to her face. The shocking shooting of the wealthy couple would lead many to wonder who committed the horrific crime. But at the time, more shocking news would develop when investigators arrested the couple's sons, Lyle and Eric, for their parents' murder. The brothers attempted to cover their tracks after murdering their parents. After the killings, both Lyle and Eric remained in the house, expecting police to respond to the sound of gunshots. but they later left to dispose of their clothes, which had their parents' brain matter and blood, then buried the shotguns along Mulholland Drive. They also went to a local movie theater and attempted to purchase tickets to Batman to use as their alibi, but didn't go with that plan because of the timestamp on the ticket stub. Then they went to the Taste of LA festival at the Santa Monica Civic Auditorium before returning home.
Okay, listen to this. They put a lot into their alibi. I mean, a lot. By the way, I love the poll. I'm going to put mine in right now. My first cassette was Thriller from TG and Y. A lot of people don't remember that store. But look at everything they went through to create an alibi. Some people say that the alibi contriving alone was enough to show they're guilty. But again, I was not on that jury.
Still with no police responding to their home, Lyle called 911 to report his parents had been killed by unknown perpetrators. In the months following the killing, the brothers went on lavish shopping sprees and purchased luxury items like expensive sports cars and Rolex watches, but also businesses, including a Buffalo Wing restaurant in Princeton, New Jersey. According to officials, the brothers collectively spent about $700,000 before their ultimate arrest. During the investigation, authorities would piece together more clues. Police reportedly investigated potential leads pointing to the mob, but later they began to suspect the brothers were the perpetrators and claimed they killed their parents for a financial motive. Things took another turn in the case when Eric Menendez confessed to the crime to his psychologist, Dr. Jerome Oziel, who then told his mistress, Judalon Smith, about the confession.
Okay, and I'm going to agree about Dr. Oziel. I'm going to agree about him. He's a nut. He's a quack. Okay? Listen, we can't pick our family. We can stay away from them. But please be careful how you pick your damn doctors, especially the shrinks, because this dude is nuts. I'm telling you what, if it had 2 legs and shaved above the knee, he was fucking it. And look at him. Oh my gosh, he's nasty. He had her listening in to turn them in, which I can't say that I blame him for that. But this guy was nuts. The SA defense has to stop. For one, it has to be proven medically. I'm not saying it didn't happen to them.
Smith winded up telling police about the brothers' involvement. Lyle was arrested 7 months after the crime on March 8th of 1990, and his brother Eric was arrested 3 days later. In August of 1990, about a year after the crime, a California judge ruled the tapes of conversation between Eric and Oziel were admissible evidence, since Oziel said Lyle threatened him and violated doctor-patient privilege. That ruling was appealed, delaying the case for 2 years while the brothers remained locked up. Then the California Supreme Court ruled in August of 92 that most of the tapes were admissible, with the exception of the tape where Eric discussed the murders. Then in December of 92, months after the ruling, an LA County grand jury indicted the Menendez brothers with the murders of their parents. During the brothers' first trial in 93, the brothers were tried together, but with 2 separate juries. Their defense attorney, Leslie Abramson, said Eric and Lyle killed their parents out of fear for their lives after going through a lifetime of abuse by their parents, but most notably sexual abuse at the hands of their father. She painted their mother as an enabler and alcoholic who was also violent towards her sons and encouraged her husband's behavior. Those allegations were supported by the testimony of 2 family members. Eric and Lyle's cousin, Andy Cano, said Eric told them about the sexual abuse. The brothers' other cousin, Diane Vandermolen, said she told Kitty about Jose's alleged abuse of Lyle, and Kitty told her that didn't happen. And while the prosecution argued the murders were done for financial gain, the defense claimed the brothers didn't think they were getting an inheritance. In the first trial, both brothers would take the stand in their own defense. Eric testified weeks before the murders. He told Lyle about the sexual abuse, which led to a confrontation within the family. Both testified their father threatened to kill them if they didn't keep the abuse a secret. The first trial ended with 2 deadlocked juries, and the LA County DA at the time, Gil Garcetti, announced the brothers would be retried. The second trial was a lot different from the first. There were no cameras in the courtroom. Lyle in the second trial didn't testify in his defense, but his brother Eric did. And jurors got limited testimony about the sexual abuse claims. Both Eric and Lyle were convicted on 2 counts of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder, and both were sentenced to life in prison with no parole, avoiding the death penalty. Jurors reportedly noted the abuse defense wasn't a factor in their deliberations. Eric and Lyle went off to different prisons and have been behind bars ever since. Fast forward decades after the murders, new calls have been made to free the brothers. After the release of Netflix's Monsters, which highlighted the Menendez brothers' case, many social media users have called for the brothers to be freed based on the sexual abuse claims.
And I get that. When I was reading, and you all know I believe everything I hear on the internet or I read on the internet, I never put this together before. They kept them in separate prisons because they said they believed those 2 worked as an orchestra, basically. And they believed that Lyle somehow was controlling Eric. And they had to keep them separated. They did not want them in the same room when they would speak to their attorneys. They honestly believed that they teamed up and one was much weaker than the other, which I'm going to assume is Eric. And if you keep them separate, one would turn on the other. Kind of like other cases we talk about. You know, on Monday, I talked about Dawn and Candace. I can't believe one hasn't turned on the other.
Another advocating for their release is reality TV star and prison reform advocate Kim Kardashian. She wrote in a personal essay about the Menendez case, writing in part, Eric and Lyle had no chance of a fair trial against this backdrop. Back then, there were limited resources for victims of sexual abuse, particularly.
Okay, I'm going to read this. Eric and Lyle had no chance of a fair trial against this backdrop. Back then, there were limited resources for victims of sexual abuse, particularly for boys. There were virtually no systems in place to support survivors, and public awareness of the trauma of male sexual abuse was minimal, often clouded by preconceived judgments and homophobia. Can anyone honestly deny that the justice system would have treated the Menendez sisters more leniently? I have said that before. If you're looking at 2 girls, it would have been looked at differently. Despite overwhelming family testimony acknowledging the abuse Eric and Lyle suffered, the public remained skeptical. And to this day, they do. Why do you think the public is still so skeptical after all these years and everything that we know? The Boy Scouts, the boys that go to Catholic schools, all the things we have heard over the years. Is it the spending spree? Is it the way they were burglarizing before and got cut out and weren't allowed money? Is it the reports of their own incestuous relationship? Is it the fact that they have been collecting money from behind bars? What do you think is still to this point? And I'm talking people that are new to the case, not people that have been watching it since the 80s. Why do you think? Because I mean, it's all new now to a lot of people. We've had several people in here today saying, I've never heard of this case. Why do you think people are still skeptical? My opinion is money. Money. I think it comes to the spending spree.
For boys. There were virtually no systems in place to support survivors, and public awareness of the trauma of male sexual abuse was minimal, often clouded by preconceived judgments and homophobia. Can anyone honestly deny that the justice system would have treated the Menendez sisters more leniently? Despite overwhelming family testimony acknowledging the abuse.
Hang on, I'll go back to that. I promise I'll scoot back. Purple Drink said trauma bonded. That was the word used umpteen years ago when they said you have to keep them separated because they have a trauma bond and one controls the other. These two were wired at the hip. And I mean, and I know siblings that are really close, but not like this. One could not go anywhere without the other. The question is, if Lyle knew what was happening in the home, why didn't he go to USC as opposed to Princeton? Maybe because his father wouldn't approve that. I don't know. But the trauma bond is something we have talked about on other shows. I spoke about it with Summer Wells' older siblings. I said, listen, those three boys have seen and experienced things to where they might not be ready to open up. And we spoke about it. It's a trauma bond. And as far as are they safe in society, I couldn't tell you because I wouldn't be the one that would be able to make that assessment. Would you feel safe if Eric moved next door with his wife? Would you feel safe if Lyle moved in with his wife? And maybe somebody in here knows this. Where did all the money go? Because when they went to jail, there was still plenty of money. Where did it go? They had no access to it. It was all shut off from them. Did it go to one of Jose's family members? One of Kitty's? I know I have heard that Eric's wife is a millionaire. Well, how long is that going to last? What exactly does she do? Because they weren't even allowed access to the money for attorney's fees because Leslie Abrams made it clear she was pro bono and so was the other attorney. We need to find that out.
Backdrop. Back then, there were limited resources for victims of sexual abuse, particularly for boys. There were virtually no systems in place to support survivors, and public awareness of the trauma of male sexual abuse was minimal, often clouded by preconceived judgments and homophobia. Can anyone honestly deny that the justice system would have treated the Menendez sisters more leniently? Despite overwhelming family testimony acknowledging the abuse Eric and Lyle suffered, the public remained skeptical. Prior to the recent social media frenzy in the case, the sexual assault allegations against Jose Menendez were also echoed by a former member of the boy band Menudo. Roy Rosilio, in the 2023 Peacock docuseries Menendez plus Menudo, Boys Betrayed, Rosilio alleged he...
Okay. I don't know what's going to happen to it. I just pulled up an article. This is from LA Times, and it's backed up by Lawyer Monthly. Never heard of it. How much money did the Menendez brothers inherit? Contrary to popular belief, Lyle and Eric did not inherit anything from their father's will. Okay, they were basically just running through credit cards. I don't know how they did this. The financial inheritance of the Menendez brothers was forfeited following their conviction for the murder of their parents and currently being held in trust. This was on October 1st, 2024. Held in trust for when they get out or until they are claimed not guilty? I don't know. Maybe that's why the DA is, trying to help him out. I don't know.
He was drugged and raped by Jose Menendez when he was a teenager. Then, in a stunning announcement, Los Angeles County District Attorney George Gascon said his office will review new evidence in the case.
First of all, I know that this is an area of tremendous interest nationally. We know, especially since the Netflix documentary came out, we're getting a lot of calls. Let me begin by saying, kind of walk you through a simple explanation of the legal issues here. There are two vehicles upon which people that have been convicted of a crime, well, there are many, but the two are a habeas and the other one's a resentencing. They can ask for a review of their conviction. We've gotten petitions for the brothers in both. Under habeas, basically what someone that was convicted is asking a review of new evidence that had been made available. That had that evidence been available to the court and the jury at the time of the trial, perhaps the outcome may have been different. And then there's a second.
If we have any legal eagles in here, I need some help with this. Because habeas corpus is normally used when someone has been convicted without a body. That's why so many DAs don't want to do it. It says habeas corpus is a legal remedy that allows someone to request a court to order the release of a prisoner who's being detained unlawfully or in prison. The term comes from Latin and translates to show me the body. And it's normally a slam dunk. You don't have a body, you can't prove a crime. Everything you have is circumstantial. Well, they have the bodies. So how is habeas corpus used when they have the bodies and the confession, and I'll just say the excuse? And show me the body can also be, well, like we hear on YouTube all the time. Where's your receipts? Where's your receipts? Like there's a robbery, but they can't find the stolen goods. So how does habeas corpus work in this? Okay, Kat said, isn't a petition for a new trial based on new evidence? Absolutely. But we're talking about habeas corpus. So that's totally different. Let's see what the DA says. Obviously, he's a little more schooled than me.
Have been convicted of a crime. Well, there are many, but the two are a habeas and the other one's a resentencing. They can ask for a review of their conviction. We've gotten petitions for the brothers in both. Under habeas, basically what someone that was convicted is asking a review of new evidence that had been made available. That had that evidence been available to the court and the jury at the time of the trial, perhaps the outcome may have been different. And then there's a second process, and it's called resentencing under California.
Y'all know I'm a huge Kansas City Chiefs fan. If I was to turn off the screen and you just heard the voice, he sounds like Patrick Mahomes, and I love Patrick Mahomes. That Kermit the Frog voice.
California law, where a prosecutor can evaluate whether someone has been rehabilitated, and based on their actions and the fact that they're not involved in criminal activity inside of the prison, that their sentence could be reevaluated. In this case, again, the Menendez brothers are asking for a review through both of those vehicles. We have not decided on an outcome. We are reviewing the information, but I think it's also important that we recognize that both men and women can be the victims of sexual assault. So today, what I want to make very clear, we have not conceded one way or the other. We're not saying that there was anything wrong with the original trial. We have been given evidence. We have been given a photocopy of a letter that allegedly was sent by one of the brothers to another family member talking about him being the victim of molestation. We've also got evidence that was provided by the defense, by his lawyers, that one of the members of the Menudo van alleged that he was molested by the father. None of
He didn't say molested. He didn't say molested. He said drugged and hard.
this information has been confirmed. We are not at this point ready to say that we either believe or do not believe that information. But we're here to tell you is that we have a moral and an ethical obligation to review what is being presented to us and make a determination based on a resentencing side, whether they deserve to be resentenced, even though they were clearly the murderers, because they have been in prison for 35 years and they have paid back their dues to society, or whether habeas is appropriate if there was evidence that was not presented to the court at that time, and had that evidence been presented, perhaps a jury would have come to a different conclusion. I don't think there is any question in this case.
Ooh, I can see by the way he's talking and the way he's using habeas as evidence was not presented to the jury. I see where this is going. Their asses are going to be out soon. They will be out soon because a DA during election time is not going to say things like this unless there's already plans in the works, in my opinion, to let someone go.
That the boys or the men, young men, one was 19, the other one was 21 at the time, that they murdered their parents. I think that's factual. It's been established.
He said, I think it's factual. It's been established. Let me ask you this. At 19 and 21, one going to Princeton, one on his way to college, do you believe 19 and 21 are adults that know better? They have access to funds. They have their own cars. They can definitely fight off Jose if that's what was going on, because that has actually not been proven. So I can't say. I'm not saying I believe them. I'm not saying I doubt them. But is 19 and 21, are those adults?
That they murdered their parents. I think that's factual. It's been established. I think the questions that are presented to us is two simple questions. One possibility, what is being alleged by his lawyers, not by us, that there was evidence that had that evidence been presented to the jury, the outcome of this case would have been different. And second, under California law, a path to resentencing where a prosecutor can evaluate whether someone has been rehabilitated, and if so, ask the court to determine whether the person should be resentenced. If they get resentenced, there are multiple things that could happen. They could walk out based on what the court decides, or they can have the sentence given a different shape, and perhaps they will stay on, but for a longer period, lesser period of time.
Woo! I don't know about you all, but I'm hearing it. I'm hearing it. I'm hearing it. I'm hearing it. I think this is greasing the wheels. He's letting people know. He's trying to Kermit explain the laws to everyone. I think that's what's going on, because I mean, I'm listening and my ears are, wow. I think he's flat out letting people know. He's getting everybody ready. He's got the trampoline down before they jump off the bridge to let them know, I've already made my decision. Listen to him.
To the jury, the outcome of this case would have been different. And second, under California law, a path to resentencing where a prosecutor can evaluate whether someone has been rehabilitated, and if so, ask the court to determine whether the person should be resentenced. If they get resentenced, there are multiple things that could happen. They could walk out based on what the court decides, or they can have the sentence given a different shape, and perhaps they will stay on, but for a longer period, lesser period of time, or they can have a new trial, right? And those are all options.
Now the brothers are in their 50s. Eric is 53 and Lyle is now 56. As they push for freedom, the LA County District Attorney said they will evaluate all of the new evidence at an upcoming hearing. Now, this case has so many layers to it that I actually want to bring on Dr. Joni Johnston, who is a clinical and forensic psychologist as well as licensed private investigator. Now, Joni, it's always so great to see you. This case was a little before my time, but I've always been very fascinated by it. You have these two brothers who were wealthy, they were handsome, but they brutally shot their parents to death. But then there's this added layer that being the allegations they were sexually assaulted by their father. What have been your thoughts overall on this case?
I think it's been very interesting to look at how it was presented in the media because it was not before my time, and to see just a lot of the attitudes, I think, and feelings about sexual abuse and who was sexually abused, who could be sexually abused, what that meant, those allegations, and to look at it from a different lens today. And so I think that's really been, I think, so interesting to see. And as a forensic psychologist, I think it's especially interesting to look at any evidence that substantiated their claims before that. Because one of the things that we always look at, of course, because you're in a forensic setting, people oftentimes have a motivation to not tell the truth because their lives are at stake or their freedom is at stake. And so we look for those kind of collateral sources or corroborating sources, and there do appear to be several of them. And it's interesting that my memory of this case in terms of how it was portrayed in the media is really different looking at some of the evidence that's come to light now.
And are you surprised that the LA County DA's office is going to be looking into the new evidence to determine if the brothers should be serving life sentences?
I think California has been pretty progressive in terms of trying to reevaluate people who are sentenced under the age of 25 anyway. And so I think they're going to be looking at it, it sounds like, from a lot of different perspectives. One being, was this kind of a fair trial? And
Hold on, Thor's here. Thor said they will never see freedom. They don't deserve to be free. I'm going to put the link down and see if anybody wants to come up and talk about this. I know a lot of you have a lot of stuff to say. And it's been going on for a long time. And let me tell you, it has been one circus after another. There has been so many attorneys that have worked for free on this case. I've always wondered to myself, why? They have been to all these different trials. Somebody obviously believes in their innocence.
Corroborating sources, and there do appear to be several of them. And it's interesting that my memory of this case, in terms of how it was portrayed in the media, is really different looking at some of the evidence that's come to light now.
And are you surprised that the LA County DA's office is going to be looking into the new evidence to determine if the brothers should be serving life sentences?
I think California has been pretty progressive in terms of trying to reevaluate people who are sentenced under the age of 25 anyway. And so I think they're going to be looking at it, it sounds like, from a lot of different perspectives. One being, was this kind of a fair trial in terms of some of these allegations that were suppressed after the hung juries? They'll be looking at that part of it. But I think the other thing they'll be looking at is has justice been served? What is the purpose of the justice system? And given the fact that they were so young, they were kind of considered juvenile offenders at the time, we have a different perspective, I think, on them as well. And so,
see, I'm not digging how they're trying to change what an adult is, because she's saying they should be considered as juvenile offenders in some perspectives. See, I'm not digging that. 19 and 21, in my opinion, is damn sure an adult. Because if you can vote and you can smoke, you can buy alcohol, and if you've got the balls, you can go to the military. There's no juvenile about it. All right? I don't like that. And I've been hearing this argument from several states, mainly California, Illinois, and New York. Yet you have some states that will try a 14-year-old as an adult, saying, you do the crime, you do the time. I think this is going to set a precedent. Let's think about how scary this is as society. That if they let them out and say, all forgiven, you served your time, we don't really know what went on. The question is, are they going to investigate the member of Menudo? Not him, but what happened. Are they going to investigate it? Because somebody would know at RCA that he was alone with Jose or at a hotel. And I am not saying it didn't happen. But 19 and 21 is not a juvenile crime.
I think the other part will just be, again, has justice been served? And, is it time to let them out kind of regardless of the facts of the case?
And prosecutors at the time claimed that the brothers killed their parents for financial reasons. They thought they were going to be taken out of the will. And prosecutors at the time contended that there was no evidence of molestation. What are your thoughts on the prosecution's argument at the time, being that the abuse didn't happen?
I think that it's not that surprising to me. I mean, how often do we have evidence that, sexual abuse, particularly when it's in the home, happened? I mean, it's oftentimes a matter of one person saying it did. Perhaps they told other people or family members or a teacher, but we certainly don't have many eyewitnesses who witnessed this to happen. And so if you're a prosecutor and you see these two wealthy, handsome young men who are, after their parents are gone, who are living this lavish lifestyle and spending all this money, it's somewhat understandable, I think, that they latched onto this, not as, evidence of them being, young, relatively young adults, and also used to a somewhat extravagant lifestyle, but looking and connecting these dots, that it must be because of their spending all this money after the fact, that must be the reason that they killed their parents.
And it was also interesting because the brothers did go to such great lengths to kind of cover up what they did. They hid the shotguns, they got rid of the clothes, they tried to come up with an alibi. And in the months after, like you had just mentioned, they went on this huge shopping spree. What do you kind of make of that, given the allegations that they did kill their parents because of the sexual abuse? But what are your thoughts on just kind of the planning and then the aftermath of the killings, where, you know, the boys weren't, or the brothers weren't even arrested until months after because of kind of this investigation, because they kind of hid so many clues in a way.
I think that's such an interesting point that you raise because, you know, both can be true, meaning
Let me answer a few comments. Snowy Poo said, why didn't they just leave? Why? Well, I don't know. I think we all have our judgments when it comes to that. We hear it quite a bit with battered women. When people say, why don't they just leave? Look, old boy is treating you like shit. Why don't you just leave? Get in your car and leave. Did they have access to money or did they? I don't know. So I can't answer that. I really can't. Baby Kisses said they got angry. I don't blame them if they were abused. Broken Goth Doll said they blamed the mafia. That was a horrible thing that went on. Not that I give a shit about the mafia, but there was a totally side investigation and they were shaking up every member of the mob they could find because they really believed that their asses were at the movies or at the vineyard or wherever, and they were spending all this time with a side investigation as opposed to looking more into their story. But that's what technology has done for us now. You present a couple of movie tickets, they're going to pull the cameras now. Didn't work that way back then.
that you know, abuse can occur, and you know, people can kill their parents, and the link between the two can be very complicated. And so, you know, typically when I'm, you know, testifying or evaluating, when you have abuse allegations, unless there's an insanity plea or diminished capacity, we're really looking at it in the sentencing phase. So it's not that abuse means you're innocent. It's that what should happen perhaps in the penalty phase is that should be taken into consideration. And sometimes also it can be taken into consideration, obviously, in the actual trial phase if you're arguing for a lesser plea. But it's typically not an excuse or something that would result in somebody being found guilty. And I think in this case, there was clear evidence, I think, of premeditation, as well as, you know, very specific attempts to cover up these crimes.
And why do you believe that the brothers weren't believed in their allegations before, and the prosecution kind of painted them out to be these homicidal monsters who killed their parents?
I think that is somewhat of a reflection of the times, meaning that I think really, you know, back when these crimes occurred, I think if you looked up a definition of sexual abuse, it would be I would not be surprised that a woman or a girl was part of that definition. I think there really wasn't even a sense that a boy or a man could be sexually abused. You know, you've heard people say, I think that the prosecutor may have said they didn't have the right equipment. And of course, we've thankfully grown, you know, by leaps and bounds in terms of our understanding that abuse is abuse. And it doesn't matter whether you're a male or female or, you know, or anything in between. It's very possible to be sexually abused. And the other part of it, I think that's really struck me about this case is I think we've also really become to appreciate and understand from a research point of view and a clinical point of view how devastating psychological abuse and humiliation is over time. And I think that's also something that wasn't really understood or taken into account in this case.
And you just mentioned a very interesting point as well. You know, if the brothers were sisters, do you think that the outcome would have been different?
I do. I do think it would have been different. Now, does that mean I think they would have necessarily got
Okay, I think we can all agree on that. If you're talking about two young girls, young women, I think we can all agree that people would have looked at this totally different. And I've had, over the years, many people reach out to me saying, This happened to me. This happened to me. This happened to me. This happened to me. And the one in the family that never believed him was the mom. I still think it's the spending spree that turned people off. Like, hey, look, if you were that damaged, then why did you need a Rolex? Why did you need new convertibles? Why did you need custom tennis rackets? Why did you need all that? You have a home in Calabasas. You have one in Beverly Hills. I think that's what really turned people off. And maybe they just kind of felt like it was their due. Like, look how we've been done all this time. Look, we're buying the pain away.
Gotten off without any consequences? No, I don't think that's the case. And we could argue that maybe they shouldn't have gotten off because there's some evidence again of premeditation. There's no indication that I've seen that their lives were in immediate danger at the time that this occurred, and that's typically what the courts require for a self-defense, case to be successful. But I definitely do think that, ever since sexual abuse has become, I guess, on the kind of the public conscience, we are more likely to see females being victimized. And I think because of that, we're more likely to believe them.
And in your opinion, how much did social media and even the Netflix show Monsters, which highlighted the Menendez case, possibly contribute to the DA's office reviewing new evidence in this case?
Well, it seems like a couple of things. One is there's no doubt that, when you have the media shining a spotlight on a certain case, it does draw the, people start talking about it. People start looking at it. People start talking to, law enforcement. People start talking to, their neighbors and those kinds of things. So I think it also grabs the attention of, people in the people in law enforcement, people in the public defender's office, people in the prosecutor's office, and those kinds of things. But it also seems like sometimes new evidence comes up. And so if you have somebody in a documentary, for example, who's saying, yeah, I was also sexually abused by this person, that's actually some new evidence. And so I think it's the combination of this increased awareness and attention, in addition to the fact that it might actually bring new evidence to light, which I think it may have in this case.
In your opinion, based on this new evidence, do you think that the Menendez brothers will be freed? Now you have like A-list stars like Kim Kardashian also kind of pushing for their freedom. But based on this new evidence, do you...
Eek. I wouldn't exactly call her A-list. No, I don't think I'd go that far. But I want to say thank you very much to Angel P and GB Folk for gifting Crime Lines and Lives memberships. Thank you so much.
Do you think there's a chance, even with this premeditation factor as well, too, that the brothers could be freed?
I think they very well could be. They might. Now, for a couple of reasons. I don't think it'll be because Kim Kardashian wrote a letter supporting them, although I think that certainly cannot hurt. I think they have a couple of things going for them. One being their prison records appear to be pretty good. They've done a lot of service, and they have a pretty good programming track record, which is something a parole board looks at. They want to know, how have you lived your life between the time that you committed your crime and now? And so that would certainly weigh in their favor. So I think that would be a huge issue. And then the other thing is just the fact that it's been 35 years. So I think those two things may help them. And so the media, I think, certainly shines a spotlight and brings attention to this case. But I do think there needs to be more than that. It can't just be a popularity contest. There's going to have to be, I think, some legitimate reasons that, a parole board or a governor can look at and kind of go, yeah, we do see that this person has programmed, this person is no longer dangerous to society. And because of these factors, we're going to potentially release this person.
Right. Dr. Joni Johnston, I always appreciate your time and your insight into the cases that we cover. For this one, is there anything else you'd like to add before we sign you off?
I think it's just a really interesting case, and I think it's good to revisit and also to appreciate the fact that we really have come a long way as a society in understanding children and the trauma they go through and the impact it can have on them.
Right. Dr. Joni Johnston, again, thank you so much for your...
Okay, but at what point is childhood abuse excused when murder happens. The only reason I don't care about Gypsy Rose being out is because she was offered a plea deal and she took it. Can't do anything about that. That was a deal made between her and the state. So at what point do we say, hey, since they were abused by their parents, then the big M is okay? I mean, at what point? Self-defense is defined in our laws easily. Someone's attacking you, you have every right to fight back. But when you're 19 and 21 and just cut out of the will, that doesn't seem like the opportune time. It's something that we need to discuss. All right, back to the song we played at the funeral.
Given all the love I feel for you, could make you change your point of view. You're leaving. Now I'm sitting here wasting my time. I just don't know what I should do. It's a tragedy for me to see the dream is over, and I never will forget the day we met. Girl, I'm gonna miss you. It's a tragedy for me to see the dream is over, and I never will forget the day we met. Girl, I'm gonna miss you.
Goodness, I can't get that song out of my head now. I didn't even know that's what they played at the funeral. My goodness, I just can't believe it. But if you're watching on the replay, please leave me a comment and let me know, at what point do we say horrible things, and I mean horrible, that have happened to someone? Does that get you a free kill space on the Monopoly board? You all let me know. Thank you, Mod Squad. Thank you so much for all the support of this channel. Look at this right here. Heaven's Little Angels, member 14 months. Kiki, 22 months. Cat OG, she said, proud CLL lifer, 34 months. Cats, Hodge Podgery, 16 months. She goes, woohoo. We got new members. Sunset Gazing, thank you for this. Prayers for all in the path of Milton and affected by Helene. You guys are the best. I will see you back here tomorrow. We are going to be talking about little Quentin Simon because jury selection just started a couple hours ago. You guys have a great rest of your day. If I don't see you in Discord or one of the other Facebook groups, don't forget we have revamped the Summer Wells Facebook group. Please come check it out. You guys are the absolute best. Me love you long time. Girl, I'm gonna miss you.